Otherwise, there we go. There's the official announcement as well. But that's just going to help, of course, to use this training later on and with other audiences. So welcome once again. So my name is Simon Greaves. I'm Executive Director at Harwood Levitt Consulting. We're a Brussels-based consulting group that focuses on communications and public affairs. We work with EFA, this sort of theme of training and development. I'm going to be the moderator for today's training session, which is part of the overall EFA capability and capacity building program for this year. And I want to thank all of you participants for joining from different places across Europe, and offer a warm welcome as well to familiar and new EFA colleagues as well who have managed to join this call. So as Jeffrey and Isabel were explaining, this training is very much has been developed in a tailored way for you, the young patient ambassadors, and to try and give you the necessary skills to engage at European level through the youth parliament that you're all devoting your time to. So as you'll see, and we'll walk through the agenda, and we've got my team of HLC colleagues here to help. We want to try and bring our insights and experience of how the EU works, and put it into sort of into a simple story which explains to you how it works, but also how you can engage with it as European citizens. Really provide your perspective on the issues that matter to you on allergy and respiratory disease front, because we know from our experience that the EU decision makers, particularly in the European Parliament, are very keen to sort of hear what citizens have to say and what advocates have to say. So we're hoping by the end of today, and certainly I think potentially another session later this year, you'll feel that you've got the skills and the confidence to engage at EU level. So throughout this, I think please share your impressions through the hashtag of the event, which Jeffrey, I think, is hashtag EFA event. And apart from that, I think we should be more or less ready to go.
If I may, Simon, just a kind reminder to everyone, to the left-hand side, bottom left-hand side of the screen, you have your mute and unmute option. We suggest that you keep yourself muted throughout the duration of the presentation and only unmute yourself should you wish to talk or ask a question. You also have the chat functionality. And as seen on the right-hand side of the screen, you can choose to either address your question or your comment to the full team available on Zoom today, or to specific individuals. So that's also an option in case you prefer to ask your question in written form instead of orally. As Simon mentioned, we're also recording this session. So if for any reason you are uncomfortable, you can go ahead and turn off your video. There's no obligation to keep that on. And of course, you can also interact with us through the various emoticons and chat function again. So just a couple of housekeeping rules before we move on.
Excellent. Sounds good. Thanks, Jeannie. You guys are in Brussels. We'll do little introductions now, I think. Okay, so should we just do some introductions then? Starting maybe on the HLC side, if we have that slide.
Sounds good. It's
the fun of virtual meetings. Okay, here we go. So just quickly, we'll start off on the HLC side, if that's okay. And then we'll just ask if everyone could, after we've started our little intros, we'll ask other people on the call as well, just to say, just to introduce themselves briefly, say where they're calling in from. That would be fantastic. So I'm Simon Greaves. I'm British. I'm based in London, actually, but I lived in Brussels for 6-7 years, a few years back, and I've always worked in and around EU affairs. So yeah, I'm married with 2 kids, and my fun fact is I've done over 200 scuba dives But unfortunately, since Brexit, I haven't been doing as many scuba dives because I've not been doing as much diving because the coast of England is quite cold and the water is quite murky. So I'm looking forward to getting to the Mediterranean again. Jeannie, over to you.
Thank you, Simon. Hi, everyone. My name is Ginevra, Jeannie for short. I am a colleague of Simon and Maria and Zoe here with us today. I've been at Harvard Levitt for just about a year and a half now. We're excited to take you on today's training around the EU. We're really looking forward to the presentation and to guiding you through the breakout groups. Should you have any questions throughout, please don't hesitate to ask out loud or on the chat. We're here to help you and support you on this journey. My fun fact is I have lived in 7 countries across 4 continents, a little less adventurous, I think, than Simon's scuba diving, but over to you, Maria.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maria. I'm half Spanish, half Italian, based in Brussels. And I joined HLC around 4 months ago. So I'm a junior consultant here. And my background is in political science and migration studies. And I'm very excited to be here today with you. My fun fact, which is probably not very fun for the majority of you, is that I dislike chocolate and everything that has to do with sweets. Yeah, I'm more of a salty person. Like I like jamon. But yeah, over to you, Zoe.
Hi, everyone. I'm Zoe. I'm from Greece. I joined HLC very recently. This is my I'm starting my 3rd month here. Before that, I was at the External Action Service in the US and Canada department. So the one that deals with, well, unit technically, that deals with the EU's relations across the Atlantic. And my fun fact is, yeah, I got on the wrong plane once and landed in the wrong city, which you would think would be impossible to happen, but it does. So yeah, that's it for me. And that's it for HLC, I guess.
Great, thank you, Zoe. I know Simon has mentioned this, but perhaps just to reiterate once again, the purpose for today and what we're hoping to do with you all today is first of all and foremost, increase your knowledge. We want you to be growing and passionate advocates for the causes that mean something to you. And the first step to do that is to make sure that you are knowledgeable and aware of the environment and the surroundings in which you can and should be advocating in. So we hope to provide you today with a little bit more of information around the very complicated machine that is the European Union and the way to move around it. The second point is we want to encourage all of you to get involved and stay involved. You're all evidently youth ambassadors for EFA, so you've already been getting involved, but we want to make sure that we keep that up. And we hope today to introduce you to some of the skills that are necessary and helpful to advocate successfully for change. And then the last thing, but certainly not the least, is the youth part of your titles. You are all youth ambassadors, and there is so much worth and value in what you can bring to the table, your fresh perspectives, your modern perspectives, your ways of thinking about things differently than the status quo. So we hope that today's training keeps you engaged and informed. In terms of today's agenda, what we hope to do with you, we will go through a tour de table, allowing all of you to introduce yourself just after this. And then we also have a very short Zoom poll to get everybody warmed up to today's virtual setting. We will then take you through a presentation around the EU, the functioning of the EU, as exciting as that sounds. And we go from giving you a little bit of insight into the institutions, the main ones, and what they do and what they are. And then we run you through a little bit of the legislative process, so how regulation happens at EU level. We'll make sure to take a short break, and then we will put into practice what we will have learned, thinking about how a specific directive goes through the legislative process, and then giving all of you a chance to personify the institutions through a short breakout exercise where you will be able to play the Commission, the Parliament, EFA, and so on. But no worries, we will explain more of this throughout and be sure to fill you in on every bit of the process with us today. And finally, we will reserve the last 20 minutes or so for closing remarks, any reflections that you would like to share on the day spent together, and of course, any time for questions and answers. So that's our plan for today. Are there any questions or comments before we open up to a tour de table? I see none coming in from the chat. All right, so I will kick off. That's fantastic. There were some very, very interesting facts, certainly more than our HLC ones. So that's wonderful to hear, very inspiring. Okay, I will launch our polls. This is just for us to warm up to the session that we have together this afternoon. You should see it appear on your screen. You can go ahead and answer when you're ready and be completely honest.
Yeah, I can.
Great. Okay, so a bit of good, a bit of could have used another Sunday. A little bit of optimism. Monday's almost over. That's good. That's true.
Well, one does not exclude the other. Eh?
That's true. That's very true. Great. There you go. Those are your results. Moving on to the next question. Have you been watching the Euro Cup? Do any of you care? Maybe. Oh, great. Look at that.
Italians.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I have to presumably tell my Italian anecdote now. I'm in London, but I went to Wembley on Saturday to see Italy versus Austria, which was very cool. Very nice.
And spiked a little bit of envy from your fellow HLC colleagues.
Based in the UK, I need all the opportunities I can get.
Indeed. Okay, so hopefully you can see the results there. Lots of people saying that their team is going strong. Hopefully that's Italy, might also be Germany or I don't know, England, perhaps still in the race. All right. Next question, a little more serious. Oh, good. So your options are learn a little bit about the EU, get to know your fellow youth ambassadors, better understand how to support EFA and advocacy, a bit of all three. I see a good majority for a little bit of all three. There's room for everything today, so that's good. Great. And then the final question before moving on, or actually two more questions. Good. All right, so a few of you feeling good about what you know about the EU, but are excited about the helpful reminder. A few of you are looking forward to today to gain a little bit extra knowledge. That's good. Fantastic. And final question. Here we go. How confident are you in your knowledge of the EU? The EU is complicated. I think we can all agree.
Very complicated.
All right. So there we go. That's already a commonality. We all agree the EU is not easy to understand. That's why we're here today. We're excited to share our thoughts, our experience, a little bit of facts around the EU. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Again, you are welcome to turn on your cameras if you feel like seeing other friendly faces. We are here. And if not, no pressure. You can go ahead and use the chat function or unmute yourself when you wish to intervene, comment, or ask a question. Okay. Hopefully you can all see my screen. Yes, great. So we thought we would start with just a few definitions, a few things that you may be hearing or have heard, and are not necessarily familiar with, or would like a little refresher. So starting on the left-hand side of the screen, DGs. So DGs is an abbreviated term for Directorate General. They are essentially the departments of the European Commission, a little bit like you would have ministries in your own country. So you have Directorate General for Climate, Directorate General for Competition, or also DG, right? Move, DG Envy for Environment, etc. Commission Cabinet. So the Commission Cabinet are the personal offices or teams of the commissioners that make up the body of the European Commission. So these individuals are sort of what you would consider ministers at national level, and we will deep dive into this a little bit later. But what we mean by the commission cabinets are just the small group of people, the small teams that help each of these commissioners within each department. MEPs, another abbreviated term for members of the European Parliament. Some of you might be familiar with the term MP, so Member of Parliament, and this term is specific to the European Parliament, hence the E in MEP. Regulation on the right-hand side of the screen. Regulation is what is considered to be a binding legislative act, so something that sort of obliges or forces, if you will, countries to adhere, and it must be applied across the European Union. Directive, on the other hand, is a legislative act that sets out a goal that all EU countries should aim to achieve. It is up to each individual countries to make up their own laws to respect this directive or the goals set in the directive. So a little different to regulation. And then finally, an opinion. An opinion is a way for different European institutions to make a statement, so to voice their opinion on something that they consider important. But this opinion doesn't contain any legal obligation. So there's no legal obligation to be fulfilled. It's just a chance for the European Union institutions to voice their concerns or comment on any relevant policy issues. Any questions so far? All right. We can move on. So as I said, we're gonna get started with first and foremost an introduction to the EU institutions, at least the main ones, and the EU more generally. So again, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to interrupt me or write in the chat. What is the EU? So the EU has close to 500 million people living in it. The EU is an organization that is made up of 27 member states. We used to be 28, but the UK left this union in 2020. The EU uses two main documents, two main treaties to operate, to work really. The first one is the Treaty of the European Union, and the second one is the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. And essentially these two documents lay out all the foundations and the many ways in which the EU can operate in without, of course, disrespecting each sovereignty or the independence of each member state that is a part of the Union. It's an organization that's very different to typical organizations or other organizations that exist, because it's a fine balance between being supranational, so above country level, right, above our own national countries, but also contains a little bit of intergovernmental powers because of the way, for instance, that the council works. So the way in which national ministers can work and collaborate together to achieve certain goals. An interesting fact that some of you may know, some of you may not, the EU won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2012 because of its contribution to, well, peace in the continent of Europe and beyond. Any questions, comments? All right. So here we look at what the responsibilities of the EU are. So what are their competencies? They're often referred to as. You've got three categories. The first, the red, are competencies or responsibilities that are specific to member states. So these are competencies that do not belong to the EU and where the EU has no say. This is education, culture, civil protection, tourism, and notably, and most recently also healthcare, which has come up a lot in the last year and a half with the global pandemic and the efforts that have been made by the EU and by member states individually. So the EU can help, they can contribute, they can support, but these particular responsibilities are not up to the EU, they're up to the member states. But then right in the middle of the screen, you'll see shared responsibilities. So competencies that both the EU and member states can regulate, but in which EU law takes precedence or is preferred. This is internal market, environment and climate action, consumer protection, energy, and foreign policy. So again, these are topics that can be worked on and regulated by both member states and the European Union. And then lastly, responsibilities that are solely EU exclusive. These are things like customs union, monetary policy, commercial policy, fisheries, and also competition rules. By competition, we mean, for instance, if you perhaps read on the news that the EU fined Facebook or Google because they didn't adhere to market regulations ensuring fair competition among their competitors. This would be courtesy of the European Union and their efforts in regulating competition in the market to make sure that there is no monopoly of the market and that everyone has a fair place to contribute and to compete. So these are the EU competencies. And now we look at the EU institutions. So really the bodies within the European Union that work on these competencies and that essentially allow the European Union to operate. So the first one is the European Commission. The European Commission is essentially the executive body of the EU. It's what we can consider the European government. So just imagine your own national one and think bigger at EU level. It represents the interests of the EU as a whole, and it is led by this lady, Ursula von der Leyen, German, and President of the European Commission since 2019. The European Parliament, on the other hand, is one of two legislative bodies along with the Council, which we will tackle next. It is the only directly elected body of the EU, and it has terms of 5 years. So every 5 years, there's a turnover in the Parliament and an opportunity to vote in or out members of Parliament or MEPs. It has 705 members, including a president, and that is him, David Sassoli, President of the European Parliament. And the goal for the European Parliament is to represent the EU citizens and their interests across the EU. The Council of the EU is the other legislative body of the European Union. It's informally known as the Council. And this body is where national ministers from each member state, from each member country, meet and adopt laws and are able also to coordinate on policies and on the way forward. The presidency here is not assigned to a single person for very long. The way it works is there is a rotating presidency every 6 months, from January to summer, and then from summer to December. Right now, we've just transitioned from Portugal over to Slovenia. And then finally, to not make things too confusing, you also have the European Council, which is not a legislative institution. It is not the Council of the European Union. Rather, it's composed of the heads of states, so all 27 heads of states of each member country. And what this particular body focuses on is the political direction and priorities of the European Union. You'll find that sometimes this particular body is in the news because they meet in Brussels on a regular basis and decide on key priorities or urgent matters every time they meet. The president of the European Council is Charles Michel, Belgian, and he is pictured below. Any questions, comments, observations so far? All right. Hopefully silence is
I'd love to know whether these names are familiar faces to people. Maybe David Sassoli is from Italy. Is he sort of a high-profile figure in Italy? Or maybe Ursula von der Leyen's been in the press a little bit in the UK. Is that the same in your countries? Probably mostly over the vaccines issues, though. So probably not for the right reasons.
Yeah, for better or for worse. Anyone? Any of these familiar faces?
Probably I've heard more of Ursula von der Leyen than of David Maria Sassoli, actually.
Okay.
Understandable. So she's been leading a lot of EU efforts, negotiations with some leading pharmaceutical companies, right, for the vaccine. So it's likely that you have heard from her, or of her rather. Okay. All right, we will move on to the next slide then. The EU institutions, what do they effectively do? So now that we've acknowledged these are the 4 main bodies of the EU, what do they do and how are they different one from the other? So the European Commission. The European Commission is the one that proposes laws. And when they propose laws, they do so to the Parliament and to the Council. The European Commission is the one that sets 5-year-long objectives and priorities. They also, of course, manage and implement EU policies and the budget. And they enforce European law, which again is a good example of the way they've done that in the area of big tech with larger companies like Facebook and Google, making sure that European law is upheld across member states and beyond. And of course, the European Commission also represents the EU outside of the European Union. So Ursula von der Leyen is often seen traveling with Charles Michel and at other formal events around the world. The European Parliament. The European Parliament has 3 main powers. That is to legislate. So with the Council, they pass European laws that again are proposed by the Commission. They also approve the European Union budget, which is a big deal, and they of course do so hand in hand with the Council again. And they monitor and oversee other EU institutions and agencies, making sure that everyone does what they are supposed to do and what they are responsible for. The Council of the EU, so number 3, the green box, they negotiate and adopt laws. They do so along with the European Parliament, and that's a process we will go into a little bit later. They coordinate national policies in specific fields, right? Because these are national ministers that come together. So the national minister for agriculture, for economy, employment, education, etc. They adopt, again, along with the EP, the European Parliament, the EU budget. So the Council of the EU and the European Parliament work very, very closely together, hand in hand, in a lot of what is then formalized EU regulation and law. And finally, the European Council is again the body made up from heads of states from each of the 27 member states. So for example, for Italy, that would mean Draghi would be the one representing Italy. And you have these individuals come together at least twice every 6 months in Brussels. These meetings are oftentimes on the news, even in our own countries. They are referred to EU summits. It's typically a big deal outside of Brussels because it's a chance for these countries to come together and discuss key priorities, which in the last year and a half have been, of course, around the global pandemic and health. But in other times, it can also be around politics and security and so on. In Brussels, they often make a fuss because a lot of traffic is brought on by their visits and their security. So they never go unnoticed when they are here in the city to meet. So these are sort of the 4 fundamental key central institutions or bodies that you should know of, and are sort of the essence of the European Union. Any questions, comments? We're going to deep dive a little bit into each of these. Anything that surprised you? Did you think some of them perhaps did something different? Or maybe you didn't know about the European Council being different from the Council? Anything you'd like to share?
If I may only,
Please,
just a comment that, especially with regards to the previous slide with the main figures, the leaders of the 3 institutions, what happens frequently is that politicians, even those that reach the higher levels of European institution, typically start from the national level, either as members of the national parliaments or leaders of national parties, well, meaning that they tend to be highly political figures first at the national level, and then before proceeding to the however you can consider this, before becoming more European level, let's say, political figures. So, for example, I think that Ursula von der Leyen used to be a minister in Germany. Charles Michel used to be a politician in Belgium, and then David Maria Sassoli. I'm not sure, was he a minister or an MP in Italy? I think you're muted, Ginny, if you're speaking.
Thank you, Akis. Yes, indeed. Not a minister, but always politically involved. Great. So I see Freya, you didn't quite get the difference between the Council and the European Council. You would think that with 27 or formally 28 member states, they could have come up with different words to describe these 2 institutions, but it can cause some confusion indeed. And they're in fact quite different one from the other. And again, the way that it's typically colloquially referred to is the Council for the Council of the EU and EU Summit for when we talk about the European Council coming together. So we'll make sure that these slides, of course, are circulated. You should have received the pre-read, but we'll circulate these as well, so you can just keep them and refer back to them on days when you need that. All right, I will hand over to my colleague Zoe, who will deep dive into the Commission.
Yes, I'm going to take you through an exciting journey through the European Commission. So The EU Commission is comprised of 27 commissioners, so it's one per member state. And this group is known as the College. So that's another kind of EU terminology that's always useful to know when you read it somewhere. And so this college includes the president, which, like we just said before, is Ursula von der Leyen. And as Akis mentioned, she was a minister. She was the Minister of Defense of Germany. So then she kind of ascended into EU politics. But before that, she worked in Germany. Then 8 vice presidents and 18 commissioners. So together, all the commissioners make decisions on the Commission's political and strategic direction. And each commissioner is also assigned a responsibility of one policy area. So just like you would have a minister of environment, minister of transport, like in your own country, it's basically the same concept. And every 5 years, there's a new college of commissioners that's appointed. And every year, the European Commission also has a yearly action plan of what they want to achieve. So under this action plan, or things that they would want to achieve, could fall under different categories. So the European Commission's role is in developing and implementing policies. So this is, for example, it proposes laws to the European Parliament and the Council. It helps EU countries implement EU legislation. It manages the EU budget and allocates funding. It ensures that EU law is complied with together with the Court of Justice. So later on in the presentation, we'll also see very briefly other institutions that obviously operate at the same time as these main 3 ones that we're talking about today. And it also represents the EU outside of Europe. So, and this is together with the EU's, I suppose, diplomatic service, or what you would consider the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is the European External Action Service, which is kind of like an independent institution, but it slightly falls under, it's a bit complicated, but it falls slightly under the European Commission as well. So next, we're going to specifically look at how the European Commission is organized. Sorry, no, we're not. We are looking at how the EU engages with stakeholders. So stakeholder consultations are always a very important instrument when the EU is undertaking any type of policy making. So for each initiative that it wants to undertake, the European Commission will develop a consultation where it targets and calls for relevant stakeholders. And by stakeholders, we mean organizations or groups that are concerned by a specific policy, so have a stake in what is going on. So that could include companies in the private sector. This could include patient groups. It could include NGOs. It can include essentially anyone who cares about a specific topic and has a say could be considered a stakeholder. So this stakeholder engagement can, in principle, take place throughout the whole policy cycle, but it kind of depends on what kind of policy, and then we would get into too many details. But feedback, so in order for the European Commission to get feedback on any type of legislative proposal, it is undertaken through public consultations, targeted consultations, surveys and questionnaires, meetings, hearings, and many other events. And so now we can have a look at how the European Commission is organized internally, so specifically. So the Commission is organized into different policy departments, which, as we mentioned before, are known as DGs, right? So Directorates General, and commissioner cabinets as well. And while they both report to commissioners, they have different purposes. So the cabinet, as we call it, is the personal office of a European commissioner. So as we said before, a commissioner is assigned a responsibility within a policy area, and the role of his cabinet or her cabinet is to give political guidance on these responsibilities rather than developing specific policy per se. DGs, however, on the other hand, develop and implement and manage EU policy, law, funding programs that fall under their policy area. So for example, DG Santé, which is the Directorate General for Health Policy, implements and manages EU policy, law, and funding programs that are related to health. So that's it for the Commission.
Maria, over to you.
Sure. So as Jeannie said before, and just like as a very brief recap, the European Parliament has three main powers: legislative, budgetary, and supervisory. It's good to remember that it has two seats, the main one or the formal one being in Strasbourg, where plenary sessions are held once a month, and I will explain later what are plenary sessions. And then the other seat is in Brussels, where MEPs or members of the European Parliament usually do their day-to-day work. It has 705 members, including the president, which is currently David Sassoli since 2019, and who is part of the Socialists and Democrats. We have now 7 political groups in the European Parliament, which are very briefly the European People's Party, the Socialists and Democrats, Renew Europe, the Greens, the European Conservatives and Reformists, Identity and Democracy, the Left, and then finally we have non-attached members, which are MEPs that do not belong to any political group. MEPs usually come together during plenary sessions at the European Parliament to discuss and vote on different topics depending on the agenda. And in order to prepare for these plenary sittings, MEPs are divided among standing committees. There are currently 22 parliamentary committees, and one of them is in health and environment policy. And usually in these committees, MEPs discuss and debate about legislative proposals that come from the Commission, as Jeannie explained. And then when a committee reaches an agreement, it is then revised and then it's voted in a plenary sitting. Can we go to the next slide?
Yes.
So in this slide, here you can see the seats per member state. So it's worth remembering that the number of MEPs per country is proportional to the total population of each member state. So for example, Germany, which is the European member state with the larger population, has the larger number of MEPs, which I think is 96. Then you can see the political groups and the proportion of MEPs in each political group, the biggest one being the EPP, which is the European People's Party, and the Socialists and Democrats. And then you can see the parliament committees. They are usually referred to with their acronyms. So for example, AFET is Foreign Affairs, DRA is Human Rights, DEVE, Development, INTA, International Trade, etc. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah, so here is just an example of some relevant committees in the Parliament. So we have the first one, Environment, Public Health and Food Safety, called ENVI. And the chairperson is Pascal Canfin. He's French. And you can see he's a member of Renew Europe, which is one of the political groups at the European Parliament. And then at national level in France, he's member of La République En Marche. And then you can see the other ones for Industry, Research and Energy, which is called ITRE. You have Cristian Silviu Bucoi. I think he's Romanian. He's member of the EPP group. And then you have the other ones. I don't think I have to go through each one of them, but just so you know. And then, for example, we have these special committees, and then we have the committees, and then we have special committees. And I think one of the most important ones right now is the Special Committee on Beating Cancer, which has a Polish chairperson, Bartosz Arlukowicz. a member of the EPP group. Yeah.
And I think just before moving along, one important thing to note is that the national political parties aren't canceled when politicians enter the European Parliament. Rather, they're just grouped together, right? So if you take a look here at the right-hand side of the screen under political groups, it's not to say that someone who belongs to La République En Marche in France is all of a sudden part of a different group at European Parliament level. Simply, they've been grouped on the basis of where they stand in the spectrum from left to right, so that the functioning of the European Parliament can be facilitated and can be ensured in simpler ways versus having every national party of every country represented. So they're just grouped together on the basis of where their political stance is, right?
Yeah. And not by nationality.
And not by nationality, exactly. So again, a good example is La République En Marche stands in the Social and Democrats political group at the European Parliament because the values align. Any questions, comments so far? Anything unclear, anything we should revise?
Could you talk more about the special committees, or why how are they chosen? Are there many special committees, or why is there one for beating cancer but not for like other things?
Sure, Freja, thank you for asking your question. So why special committees? There are obviously topics that are constant in politics, and that is trade, that is development, that is foreign policy. But then there come topics that are trending, for instance, unfortunately, cancer, and needing to beat it, right? Or needing to find ways, regulations, efforts that can help fix this problem, let's say, or this challenge in society. And the reason these special committees exist is to give light, or to shed light on particular priorities. This commission, so the commission led by Ursula von der Leyen that began in 2019, is very focused on cancer and looking for ways to beat it, or to decrease it, or to fix the lifestyles, or in any case, the problems at origin that are causing such a rise in cancer cases. And so there was this effort on the part of the European Parliament to create a specific committee that could address this particular political priority, which perhaps was not one, 20 years ago, but has become one increasingly. And this also aligns with the efforts from the European Commission in trying to fight it. So it's a way to show political priority, and it's of course a way to align also the efforts of the Commission with those of the Parliament, to making sure that all institutions are doing what they can to discuss this, to prioritize this, and to find feasible, sustainable solutions for the long haul. Is that clear?
Okay, thank you. Yes.
I would have a question too, but back to the stakeholder involvement, because I know that in the policy-making process for them, it's very important to gain throughput, you know what I mean, how do you say that in English? Can you? Sorry?
Legitimacy?
Exactly, that's it. To gain that, they have so many consultations. But now recently, I've read that operational grants were not really that. There's something with operational grants, and organizations are a bit afraid they're not getting them. But I didn't really understand that. Do you know what I'm talking about? Maybe also EFA knows more about that. But for me as a patient without EFA, of course, I don't really have a voice so much. So yeah, that's something close to my heart.
I can jump in if you allow me for a short comment here. So what we had since last year, I think mid 2020 was a discussion about the new health budget, which in the face of the COVID pandemic was decided that it should be boosted quite a lot, quite considerably compared to the previous version of the health program. And I'm talking now about the long-term health programs, which normally are 7 year, their duration is about 7 years. So last year was the time to discuss between the institutions about the new one that would start being enforced from 2021. And indeed, the health program was quite increased, but of course, sometimes the devil is in the details. And then a whole discussion started about how these budget will be allocated, both in terms of time. So what are going to be the milestones and the targets for each year, but also to what goal, to what purpose. So there's a discussion still ongoing about whether this budget should be allocated through action grants or through core operational grants. The Commission has decided that with regards to the civil society at least, to non-governmental organizations, they will go for this year at least with action grants, meaning budget that will be allocated to NGOs will be tightly attached to certain actions that need to be undertaken and accomplished within a given time frame, while a core operational grant, on the other hand, conceptually is a different type of support, as it just means that budget will be allocated to certain organizations working on certain areas, but not with targets or objectives attached. So it will help. They have helped in the past in the long-term sustainability of these organizations working in a certain area. So that is a discussion now for 2021. The Commission has decided to go for action grants, and we are working both individually as EFA, but also in cooperation with other organizations to make sure that from next year the Commission allocates operational funds to organizations working in different health areas and not action grants.
And may I ask how that affects you now and us as a youth parliament, or doesn't it affect us at all?
It doesn't. It doesn't. Operational grants had been abolished largely since several years already. So organizations that could sustain working with the institutions and doing their advocacy have remained intact. Others have found many difficulties, of course, financially speaking. So EFA has been in place, has addressed those challenges. But of course, if the Commission at some point decides that grants should start being allocated again on an operational basis, we would more than welcome it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ekis. Okay, if there are no more questions, we will continue. I will give the floor back to Maria, please.
Sure. So I'm going to take you very quickly through some European Parliament proceedings and other definitions. So in order to ensure transparency and collaboration among different actors, the European Parliament works in different ways and with different stakeholders. And here are some examples. So for example, I'm going to explain to you what's an amendment. An amendment is a statement that aims at add, revise, or improve a Commission proposal. And they are a key way to influence and change EU legislation. And it's a way for MEPs to bring into play the different interests of voters, lobbyists, NGOs, and other interest groups and stakeholders. And usually, so how does it work? The European Commission proposes a draft legislation, which goes first to these parliamentary committees that I just explained. And this is when MEPs can introduce amendments to change this initial proposal of the Commission. And afterwards, when amendments are decided and debated, this proposal will go to plenary, where it will be debated and voted. Then we have hearings. So usually a committee or some committees together are permitted to organize hearings with different experts when they think this expert is gonna bring an essential piece of information on a particular subject that they are interested. And most committees organize regular hearings. For example, I used to be a trainee at the European Parliament at the Subcommittee on Human Rights, and we used to organize committees almost every week on different human rights issues, on China, Middle East, South America, on women, minority groups, etc. And these hearings are key because they allow MEPs to hear from experts and hold these discussions that are key. Then we have intergroups, and they are unofficial groupings of MEPs who are interested in a particular topic that does not necessarily fall within the scope of the Parliament's normal work. Because they are unofficial, they cannot express or represent Parliament's view. And this is just to answer Freya's question about special committees. So you have special committees which are official groups, and then you have these intergroups which are unofficial gathering of MEPs that have common interests. And that can be, for example, there is an intergroup on cancer, another one on anti-racism and diversity, and one on artificial intelligence, for example. And then we have informal interest groups or lobbying groups. And basically, this is, so the institutions, they interact with a different range of groups and organizations and stakeholders. And this is key because it's part of the decision-making process that makes sure that EU policies actually reflect what EU citizens need and want. These groups can be private, public, or even NGOs, and they can provide the Parliament with knowledge and specific expertise in different areas such as economic, social, environment, and scientific areas. And yeah, I think that's it for this slide. Maybe.
Can I just ask one question there on, I know there's obviously an intergroup on allergy and asthma, right? Akis or someone else on the line. So I'd be quite interested to know, I know that's been quite active. You guys have been quite active in working with that group. Could you, any sort of background on that you can share?
Yeah, if I may clarify, first of all, because it is an issue that I have found a lot with the parliamentarians as well, and even assistants, that it's an interest group rather than an intergroup. So it's not a European Parliament entity, but it's independent from the European Parliament, but of course in cooperation with MEPs. Yes, that is a project that started in 2015. That is a collaboration between EFA patients and the European Academy of Allergy and Clinical Immunology, so the Society of Allergologists in Europe. So patients and healthcare professionals came together to form this interest group in order to enhance the visibility of allergy and asthma health in the European Parliament discussions, with the support of MEPs who want to champion the cause of allergy and asthma in the political discourse. Yeah, the interest group has a membership of 15 currently MEPs. The chair is Mrs. Sirpa Pietikäinen, an MEP from Finland, from the European People's Party. And then we have 14 other members from different countries and different political groups. We are in constant dialogue with them, with everything that has to do with allergy and asthma, with joint statements that the interest group publishes on critical political moments. For example, last year it has been quite a busy year with the Beating Cancer Plan, with the EU Green Deal, with, of course, the links of allergy and asthma with COVID. These are issues that we highlighted and we published extensively about. And finally, yes, what we normally organize one event annually, hosted by parliamentarians, hosted by the members of the European Parliament on timely topics. It has been, in the past, it has been, there have been events on research, there have been events on air quality, on timely topics that are discussed and are relevant legislatively speaking.
Fantastic to get that overview. And I just wonder, of those 15 members of the group, I'm sure there's some from some of the countries represented on the call, I'm sure, which might be an interesting angle to take. There's some Italians and Spaniards and what have you, I'm sure, Akis.
Yes, definitely, both Italians and Spaniards, yeah.
That's very good. Excellent. Great. Back to you, Jeannie.
All right, thank you. Back to you, Maria.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Thank you, Akis. So now, as promised, I will briefly explain what are plenary sessions or sittings. And just as I mentioned before, the European Parliament has 2 seats, and the formal one is in Strasbourg, where plenary sessions actually are held once a month. Plenary sittings are the culmination of the legislative work that is done in committees and in the political groups. They are also a place in which MEPs take part in the EU's decision-making process and express their opinions in front of the Commission and the Council. As I said, Parliament meets in plenary sessions every month in Strasbourg for 4 days. So it's quite busy. Basically the whole Parliament goes to Strasbourg for 4 days. And the plenary agenda is decided by the Conference of Presidents, which is made up of the Parliament's presidents, so David Sassoli, and the leaders of each political group. Who's in the plenary sittings? So we have the President of the European Parliament, we have all 705 MEPs of the 7 political groups and the non-attached members. And then we also have the European Commission and the Council of the European Union. Plenary sessions focus on debates and votes. So usually what will happen is a parliamentary report is debated by the Commission and MEPs who will express their views and opinions. Then this report is put to vote. And unlike voting, which usually happens very fast, debates can take a long time, depending on the number of members that want to speak. And they usually speak in their own language, and there is a whole structure of simultaneous interpretation into other official EU languages. And as we discussed before, this is where amendments are presented. So MEPs will draft amendments in the parliamentary committees, and amendments are presented here and are voted and adopted or not, depending on the votes. The European Parliament usually takes decisions on an absolute majority of votes casted. And the texts that can be adopted in plenary are legislative reports, budgetary procedures, or non-legislative reports. And that's it. I don't know if you have any questions, or if Ginny, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, maybe just if anyone has had any experience or interaction with your own national parliaments, and if this perhaps is different from what you've seen so far around the European Parliament. The European Parliament, the Council, and also the Commission are situated quite centrally in Brussels and are very accessible, both for tourists, but also in the case of meetings or events. The Parliament pre-COVID times used to hold several, and on occasion they were also accessible to the public with the necessary protocol and process, of course, of registration, but they do take a lot of time and effort in making sure that they maintain a direct connection, or as direct as possible, with citizens. You can write letters to the Commission, and these are read and often responded to. So just wondering if any of you have any experience with your own national institutions, with the Parliament specifically. Have you met with any members of Parliament? No, no one?
I have met a few members of the Swedish Parliament in hearings. I think it would be like the most similar about what you've spoken about, and it was like on specific issues like what do you think about youth with disabilities, about their free time, and so different organizations were invited. That was the last one I attended, but I don't know really if it's different.
That's fantastic. Yeah, did you enjoy? I mean, presumably it was nice to be a part of that dialogue and to be considered, as a voice in expressing an opinion, particularly as a young voice. How did you feel about that?
Yes, it felt really good, and I think it's when I met a few different members of Parliament, they are very different from each other. So this one was really nice, and it felt like she really listened to me or us. And then some are like, they feel like they just have to do it, and they just say, yes, I think about that, and nothing happens. So
yeah, indeed. I've worked with members of Parliament before. You get some good ones, you get some less good ones, just like life and everyone in the world, right? Great. Laura, would you like to say anything?
Yeah, sure. Like Akis introduced me to the German Allergy and Asthma Association, and then they were asked to have someone, like a young person, speak in Parliament. So then I could speak in a committee for that, and I really felt like the pre-talk went incredibly well, and she was super convinced. And then my normal presentation in the committee, I felt I did a presentation, but I really want to be able to capture people but for this, I think it can go well, but it's not, you need more for that. So I don't know how to get that. And yeah, I don't think it's so different to this. Yeah, and then I'm often meeting politicians from the Greens just because I'm a member of that party, but yeah, I'm talking about health with them, but I'm not sure if it's having such a huge impact, but at least I can mention it and then see what comes from that.
Right, and certainly the idea is also about creating experience for yourself, right? And making sure that you have that exposure and that you regularly create these connections and create these opportunities to meet with these people. And hopefully over time and several discussions and several exposures, you're able to have an impact, or to make these connections that can have an impact at a later stage. It's worth mentioning that the training we have today is part of a 2-day training. And the second part of this training will revolve specifically around public speaking and advocacy, and how do you create your message for your targeted audience, for your MEP or your commission official, and how do you express that message in the best way possible to be convincing and to make the change that you so want. So we'll be sure to follow up with that as well, and just making sure that we can give you or assist in supporting you with the full package, so that you can feel even more confident and more able in walking into these meetings and having these conversations with MEPs.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right that it takes the experience, because like without it, I wouldn't even know what I'm missing, and now I can work on it.
Right. And, I'm sure you can attest to this too, Laura. Like the first time you go, maybe you're especially, nervous, or you don't know what to expect or how it might go. And then over time, you just build that familiarity with, with the context that you're in, and maybe you start to see some familiar faces, and that is helpful too, right?
And if I may add,
of course,
also kind of continuous contact is really what can drive change, or for you, or something to be adopted that you are pushing for. Because sometimes, you might have a specific contact with an MEP and it's just a very busy time, or it's a time when there are other priorities. But if you continue, and as you continue, you get better and more convincing, and they know you might hit that perfect moment. Like so much in this is about timing. And sometimes you can hit that perfect moment where there's a gap in the agenda, or there is a gap in capacity, or like there's a space opening up for a new project or something. And by you just always being there and at the forefront, they'll look at you and be like, oh gosh, yeah, and I've seen her so many times. Let's think about this, or let's do something. So a lot of it is, of course, delivery and practice, but it's also persistence.
Yeah.
And that's something that we will talk about, of course, like Ginny said, in the second session.
Yeah, and I think to build off of that as well, the idea that some themes sometimes become more of a priority than they have been before. So of course, health should always be at the top of everyone's priorities, politicians most of all, but it hasn't always been. And I think the sort of exposure and priority that health has received over the last year and a half out of urgency is such a key moment and opportunity to express concern or your opinion or your needs as a health advocate, right? So it's also about choosing your time and building on that persistence and that delivery, and kind of having all the elements come together when you need them most. Okay, so we're going to proceed with the presentation. We've got a couple more slides. We're going to just go over with you the actual co-legislative process, so how legislation happens at EU level, and then we'll take a break so you can all relax and have a glass of water and process all of this before we return and put it all into practice.
Jeannie, can I just make a quick, sorry, interrupt your flow. Can I just make a quick point on the parliamentarians as well?
Please.
Just to build on that. So I think the other element from 2 points, one is kind of how open and interested parliamentarians and their officers, so they all have an office, of course, with some research assistants. They'll be very generally open to patient experience and sort of arguments from citizens. So I think don't underestimate how you could get a message across, whether it's an email or a phone call or what have you. The second is they don't just exist in this sort of Brussels bubble. So very much they're in Brussels, or pre-COVID, they'll be in Brussels for a week, a month, or 2 weeks, a month, for Strasbourg for a bit of time. But obviously they'll be very active at national or regional level in their own country. They'll have a constituency office. They'll have links into the local political establishment. And many of the MEPs might go back into national politics after a time in Brussels. So I think those relations that you can build up, often you can try and engage with an MEP when they're actually in the country, not in Brussels. And secondly, they can really help you with some of your national issues potentially as well, given how networked they'll be in political parties and sort of administrations in their country. So I just thought I'd sort of add those two little elements too before we moved on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Simon. Okay, back to you, Maria.
It's me, actually.
Yeah. Oh, Zoe, sorry.
So yeah, I'm going to take you through the last few slides before, like Ginny said, we take a well-deserved break, or you take a well-deserved break. So what we can see here now is the EU's standard kind of decision-making process. And as you see in the slide, the European Commission has the right to propose a legislation. And then there are two legislators. There's the Council and the European Parliament, which means that they're the ones to approve legislation. So if legislation is passed, then it's up to member states to ratify it, which means, so ratify is essentially officially including it in their national law. So there are four main elements or main steps to this process. So the European Commission will first submit a proposal to the Council and the Parliament. And then if the Council and the Parliament come to an agreement at the first or the second reading of this legislative proposal, so it's by reading, we mean they kind of go over it together. So if the first or the second time that they do this, they agree, it'll be adopted and everything's great. However, this is often not what happens. So if the two institutions, so the Parliament and the Council, can't agree on something after the second reading, a conciliation committee is convened, and which is basically a different stage of negotiations between the two institutions that have different representatives, but this is something that is covered more in depth in the annex of the slides. So once you get these slides, you'll be able to read more about conciliation. But like I said, it's basically just a new step of negotiations. And then if they agree at this third reading, then the legislative act is adopted. But if it's rejected again at this stage, or if they can't reach a compromise, then the proposal is not adopted and the procedure ends. So it's then closed. And in the next slide, we are going to essentially, yes, so we've spoken about the European Commission, the Parliament, the Council, but there are many other institutions that operate within this EU kind of institutional structure. And as you'll see here, we've listed quite a few of them, like the Court of Justice, the EAS, Central Bank, so you can see them all on the slide. But for example, I'm just going to give a quick overview of two or three of them, just for you to know. The EAS, which we mentioned before, which is the External Action Service, the second one on the slide, is basically the foreign ministry or the diplomatic service of the EU, and it elaborates and enforces EU foreign policy. The central bank is the central bank of the 19 EU countries that have the euro, and its main task is basically fiscal and monetary support and oversight, and then also maintaining price stability within the Eurozone. And then you have the Committee of Regions, which is quite an interesting one, which is an advisory body, which is also consulted during the legislative process. And it's comprised of elected regional and local representatives of all 27 member states. And they can share their opinion on how EU legislation affects their region and their city rather than their country. So it's kind of going at a more local level, which is also very interesting in certain policies, for example, environmental policies, transport, like anything that could affect not only on the national level, essentially. And so now I'm going to hand this back to Ginny in case you have any questions before we take a short break.
Great, thank you, Zoe. So are there any questions? It's certainly quite a load to handle, a lot of information. But these are sort of the key highlights of the way that EU works, the way that EU operates, and how it really comes together when it's time to legislate or to create laws. Any questions, any feedback? Don't be shy. You can also use the chat.
Is it worth saying, Ginny, there might be some questions, but we went over very many of the formal ways that MEPs and sort of different institutional figures can have an impact, but they're also clearly people that tweet, that get engaged with social media, that sort of try and get into the media over their pet topics. So I think there's a legislative role, and then there's also just their role as kind of dare I say, celebrities, or someone with a voice and with a following. So I think particularly nowadays, then that's become an important aspect of influence from these parliamentarians. And also can be a dialogue and a way of actually engaging with those parliamentarians. And I say that because I think, as you might expect, some of the Commission and the more civil service style European Union institutions are less kind of focused on public relations and on communicating publicly. But certainly in terms of the MEPs, I'm sure Akis and others can attest to this, they're very keen to communicate as much as possible. And any opportunities they have to do that, they'll be keen to have. Is that your experience, Akis, with EFA?
Yes, generally MEPs are working on files on which they often are not experts. Therefore, they always welcome input by stakeholders, from civil society organizations, from people that work on those areas, and therefore they see it as a help to their own work in the European Parliament. So generally they do welcome input.
And I think that's a really good point to you both, Simon and Akis. We have to remember that while they are, of course, important individuals and they make up so much of the EU, they also depend on their constituencies, right? They depend on their voters. And so there's a place for you there, particularly for those of you who can vote, to have an impact and to be considered priority for them, because without these voters, they cannot keep their position. And so a lot of the engagement that they take on digitally or through events or meetings is to ensure that they maintain the support of their voters, and they are prioritizing the interests of their voters. So don't feel like just because they travel to Brussels and to Strasbourg and they are, very much formal individuals with a lot of power, that you don't have a say in what they do or what they say. You're a fundamental part of their agenda, because without you, they wouldn't be elected. So it's an important part to keep in mind, an important thing to consider, particularly when you're meeting with them. And you need a boost of confidence. Just remember, they wouldn't necessarily be there if it weren't for citizens voting them in. All right, so if there are no questions, what I suggest we do is take a break. We can meet back at 6:55 sharp, so that we can continue on with the rest of the presentation and break out into our groups to make sure that you all get a little bit of practice with what we've been saying and can exercise a little bit of the knowledge that you've taken in this first half. So short break, and we'll be right back.
Great.
Okay, great. See you soon.
See you.
Hi, everyone. So just a couple minutes before we all gather back. All righty, we're coming back, giving you all a few seconds still to gather yourselves, grab your glass of water, and join us. All righty, everyone. Hope you had a good break, got some water in your system, were able to stretch. Just before we move on with the second half of today's presentation, I just wanted to address Freya's point in the chat. Thank you, first of all, for bringing this up. I'm going to answer this in two ways. The first is we are going to dedicate the second half of the workshop, so day 2 of today's workshop, only on this, solely on this, on public speaking and on advocacy training, really, around how best to approach your stakeholders, how to do it, what to communicate, in what order should your messages be, et cetera, so that we hope that you will join us for that when we will organize that come fall, so after the summer. But we can also, and we'll certainly circulate a few slides with a little bit more information around suggestions and tips for interacting with members of parliament. So we'll make sure to add these slides to the day of deck that we're showing you today, and so that you can have access to that and can get a little bit of a sense of what day 2 will look like for us. Just briefly and concretely, it's important to interact with MEPs, absolutely. And while it is very important to make sure that you address your issues and your priorities, it's also important to capture their attention and to make it an issue that they will think is very important as it is. And so the way that we suggest going about that is often to add, for example, an emotional anecdote, right? Or a personal story to it, letting them know that you have direct experience in the area that you're advocating for, or giving them a concrete example, perhaps about a friend of yours, or a family member, someone that they can associate with and all of a sudden feel closer to, typically helps as well. And of course, it's always helpful to interact with MEPs that have an interest in the topics that you'd like to address and that you'd like to prioritize, because that means that they have a history of working with these topics and might have a little bit more of a historical knowledge, or even just a history with working on these topics. And that might be helpful to you and prove beneficial in your conversations with them. So this would kind of be our summary answer in a couple of lines. But again, we'll make sure to add a couple of slides to this deck so that you have a little bit of this information on hand, and then hopefully you'll join us for day 2 and we'll be able to tackle all of this. But we wanted to make sure that today we gave you the real fundamentals around the EU, and that you really understood the different stakeholders involved and at what time they are involved, so that you know where best to target your efforts when it comes to connecting with relevant stakeholders. So, all right, moving on to this session. So as I mentioned, we are going to be putting into practice the theory that we presented to you. And what we plan to do, I'm about to hand over to Simon, is review a meaningful directive, so a meaningful type of law submitted by the European Union around energy performance in buildings. And again, just kind reminder, a directive is not a regulation, so it's not legally binding. A directive is set by the EU, and the hope is that each country will then create the laws that are necessary to make the directive applicable within each member state. So handing over to Simon, who will talk a little bit more about the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive.
Excellent. Okay, thanks, Jeannie. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, perfect.
Great. So thanks for the team for all the clear explanation of the EU and how it works. It's complex, but hopefully we've broken it down a little bit for you. So in this next short section, won't take too long, then we can go into our breakouts. Just wanted to sort of say a few words about one particular piece of legislation, directive, that I think is certainly seen as an EFA success story, and which I think maybe will help illustrate and bring to life some of the theory we were just hearing about how the EU works. And then I know Zoe's got another example that we'll take you through as well. So, Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, that doesn't sound like it's got anything to do with respiratory health, you might be asking yourself, but it really does, and I'll sort of seek to sort of explain how. And Akis, you may have some experience as well from the what EFA did around this, so I'll bring you in. So, 2 directives here, Energy Performance of Buildings Directive and the Energy Efficient Directive. They date from around a decade ago originally, and obviously, as the name would suggest, aim to boost energy performance of buildings. So super important as part of that overall green agenda. They really wanted to do, 3 things: boost energy performance of buildings and really improve building stock by 2050, create that stable environment for investment decisions, and enable consumers to make more informed choices. So obviously things have moved along quite a lot in terms of the green agenda over the last 10 years. And so the European Commission in 2020 published this big thing called the Green Deal. It was like one of their major, and still is one of their major priorities at the moment. And part of that had this aim to sort of boost energy renovation in buildings across Europe. And as you've no doubt read already, that means that they're going to revise the original directives and basically update them with some new targets and some new objectives, which kind of bring it into line with the higher ambition we all have to combat climate change. Now, there were a few steps then in this process, and then we'll come on to the link and the relevance to EFA's interests. So far, in October 2020, the Commission presented its plan, its initial plan, as part of the Green Deal. Then there was a so-called impact assessment. So that's when a government, or in this case, the Commission, will sort of do a quantified analysis of what that impact would be, the benefits, the costs, a very economic perspective. That was published for feedback, so for consultation, for people to comment, until March 2021. And then just ending now, I presume, we've got this 12-week public consultation on that proposed approach and getting input from stakeholders. And so we're just coming to the end of that period now. Now, what's going to happen next is that the legislative proposal itself, so the draft directive amendment, will be published in the last few months of 2021. So Q4 2021. Remember that, we'll come back to that in a second. So why does this matter, you may ask? Well, because there's a real issue, as you all know, around indoor air quality. And this is a major driver of chronic illness, as we know from a global perspective. And although that original directive didn't talk about air quality at all, there's a real opportunity to ensure that the air quality indoors, which can cause so much challenge to allergy sufferers and others, is included in this. And where EFA really engaged and lobbied the Commission around this and other stakeholders was around this issue of indoor air quality and ensuring that there'll be some sort of compulsory indoor air quality certificate for all new and renovated buildings. So that would be, pretty transformative in terms of indoor air pollution in Europe. And I'll bring you in a second, Akis. The advocacy here, like the actual active advocacy by EFA, included, of course, engaging with the Commission, providing input to consultation from the Commission, but also engaging with MEPs from the European Parliament on this very topic, leading to, I think in 2019, a European Parliament resolution saying that it was really important that there was this indoor air quality certificate included in future legislation. So why is that important? We've got the voice of the citizens, the Parliament, saying officially how important this is, which means that we might be hopeful that the draft directive that would come out later this year in Q4 2021 would include this measure on air quality, which would be great. Akis, have I captured it right?
No, it's an excellent overview, Simon. Just a few elements to maybe to add from my side. First of all, I would say first of all that EPBD, the energy performance of buildings, is the only legislation that is looking at buildings at the European level. The problem is that it looks at buildings only outwards. So how buildings perform, how buildings behave in terms of energy emissions, energy-related emissions, but it doesn't look inwards. What happens inside the buildings? How healthy are the indoor environments? How healthy is the built environment at large? That's why we try to introduce from the beginning, we chose EPBD to introduce from the beginning the health aspects of indoor air quality into this legislation. In the previous amendment, now currently it's another amendment that is happening, that is open for consultation, but there's already one that happened back in 2017. We did an expensive campaign, as you mentioned. We engaged with the Commission, with MEPs, but in the end, in the amended version that was adopted in 2018, we were not able to see the main let's say, element of our campaign, which is the indoor air quality certificate, into the final text. And that happened while on the side, many commission officials and people within the parliament acknowledged that it is an area that represents a policy gap. And that it needs to be addressed, especially the building sector, but in relation to health. Now, why do you say that it's a success story? Because since 2018, we have seen some developments that show that there is a momentum towards discussing more and more indoor air quality in the context of this particular directive, but also generally, because we have seen, for example, as you mentioned, the 2019 European Parliament resolution, a non-binding text, but still an institutional text that has been adopted by the Parliament, the Clean Air for Europe, that has included this provision for a mandatory indoor air quality certificate for all new and renovated buildings in Europe. We had last year the research program, the Horizon Europe program, that was adopted, that includes some projects for the coming years on indoor air quality and its links with health. We had last month in May the Zero Pollution Action Plan adopted by the European Commission after, again, another process of consultation with stakeholders, which includes for the first time a separate paragraph, a separate section on indoor air quality, acknowledging that it is a highly fragmented policy landscape and that it calls for action, and it commits to act, to assess the situation and act on the health elements of indoor air quality by 2023. Now, when you know that you are fighting for a good cause and politicians do not listen, of course, you have to knock many doors. This is what we have done. We have been in contact with the industry of buildings. We have been in contact with other environmental and health NGOs. We have been in contact individually with MEPs pushing for these asks. And we hope that eventually there is a momentum being formed for a clear, mandatory, binding legislative action that would help improve indoor air quality in Europe. And yes, the main argument is the certificate, and maybe we can clarify a few things about the certificate of indoor air quality. We consider this as an indicator for the internal environment of buildings, as a platform where residents, occupants, but also workers, because we're also talking about professional buildings, offices, factories, and what you have, to know the pollutants, to measure the pollutants that are in the buildings, and to have a clear overview of the health, potential health benefits or impact or adverse effects of the indoor air quality in a given building. So this is what the certificate is all about. And now we are in the process of integrating these asks in the ongoing consultation that you mentioned, which is going to be closed soon, and the final text adopted by the European Commission at the end of 2021, and then passed on to the European Parliament and the Council for the negotiations.
Great, thank you so much. So, Aki, so it's a really good example of how creating policy momentum over time can lead to real, potentially significant outcomes for Europe. Because Aki, if we think, we'll talk now in a sec about the European Union procedure, but as Zoe was saying earlier, with directives, then ultimately that's going to have to be implemented when it becomes law into every country in Europe. So You know, normally about 2 years after a directive becomes EU law, then the member states, so for example, Italy, although many others, not the UK, but will have to have made that and put that into their own statute books. So that could mean in a few years' time, in Italy and other countries, all new buildings and renovated buildings would require these certificates, which is significant.
And just one quick note, because I don't want to be understood like EFA getting the whole credit of creating this discussion, because influence by definition is difficult to measure. So EFA cannot get the credit, or I don't know how much of the credit can get. We only know that EFA has been one of the few stakeholders out there working on indoor air quality, and that's for sure. So there must be something.
Yeah, for sure. It takes many people to move and influence these bits of legislation. So talked a little bit about that. So that's why it's interesting and relevant. So just be interesting to sort of think a little bit about what you heard before from Jeannie and the team around this ordinary procedure, the legislative procedure that you can see there on the left-hand side. So we heard about how the European Commission proposes, and then the European Parliament on the one hand, the European Council, or the Council on the other, will sort of undertake a legislative scrutiny of the draft legislation. And then that legislation is kind of agreed by both parts with amendments, no doubt, and then it can become signed off, and then ultimately, as I was saying, transposed into national law. So a few steps there, and different opportunities to engage with those different institutional actors. And you heard then just a little bit about, obviously, the directives itself. So I'd just be interested in any thoughts from people on the call about sort of what's going to happen sort of next, and what's going to happen in terms of this proposal for a directive as it goes through the European Union process. Anyone, any thoughts on that? So I think we said already around Q4 this year, 2021, we're likely to get the actual proposal for a directive published, a nice big document. And then it will be going into the different, into the Parliament and into the Council. What happens then, do people think?
Any first thoughts? Perhaps even where does it all begin? Who even starts this conversation? Who brings this topic up to begin with? It's a judgment-free zone, so we accept any answers.
Or chat.
Or chat, yes, absolutely. Perhaps Freya or Alessandro. Laura, any ideas where this would begin?
So we can sort of step through it. I'll give my perspective, and then I'm sure others might chip in as well. And guys have been looking at this as well. But obviously we've got, Akis was talking a little bit about the activity that EFA has now. So over the next months until Q4 this year, then there'll be an opportunity to keep engaging with the European Commission, because they're the ones holding the pen on this particular proposal. So they'd be the main people to talk to. MEPs might start thinking about it because they're hearing something's coming, particularly those MEPs that are already following that area. So it might be wise that they'll be starting to think about it. That could be a logical place to also engage. I'm sure, again, that's part of Akis's plan. Then once that sort of document is published, then suddenly it's out there. Suddenly you can read it, you can analyze it, and it goes into the Parliament, where after a period of time, they'll decide who in the Parliament is going to be responsible for it, which MEP is going to be the sort of holding the pen on report on the piece of legislation. And at that point, the Parliament will, as was described, sort of look at it, scrutinise it. They'll come up with their initial report. The Council of Ministers at the same time will be doing something very similar. And then, as we heard, they effectively sort of exchange reports, suggest some different amendments, and negotiate between themselves over a period of at least typically a year, and generally more like 18 months to 2 years, until at the end of that period there's a sort of agreement between the different institutions, and you end up with that proposal becoming law. That around right, Akis? Anything else that you would highlight in those steps?
No, just of course, this is why the Commission is called the proposers. So it initiates the procedure. It is the driving force behind the proposal of each procedure, and then it consults stakeholders extensively. Normally, there are 2 rounds of consultations, as we mentioned earlier, before adopting a final text to be passed on to the Council and the European Parliament. But in the meantime, it doesn't mean, as you implied, Simon, doesn't mean that the Parliament stays inactive. Things are starting being prepared already in the Parliament, and it's also the case sometimes that if it is a big enough initiative, that the Parliament starts its own initiative report, meaning that it might take the initiative of developing a resolution to be adopted, while the consultation at the Commission level is still ongoing. So this is the resolution, for example, that we mentioned earlier about clean air. It is their own initiative reports of the European Parliament, non-binding, but still they show the direction where if they are adopted, they show the direction where the European Parliament wants to move towards with regards to a specific legislative piece.
Yep, exactly. And are there ways, Akis, that, so thinking about air quality, indoor air quality, super important to everyone on the call. Would EFA maybe sort of organize a bit of a campaign or have some sort of organized approach to for EFA supporters and members to write to MEPs? Is that something that might happen?
Yes, it does. It does happen. We prepare some a joint letter at the moment in collaboration with other organizations where we are members of, and we try to include these indoor aspects of air quality in all relevant pieces, and that includes the ambient quality directives, the outdoor quality directives, which are also under consultation, interestingly enough, at this point. That also includes, for example, the regulation on construction products, which are also potential pollutants because they emit chemicals, they emit dangerous substances in indoor environments. So we try to introduce these health elements, these health-related considerations in all relevant dossiers.
Very cool, very good. That's really helpful. Real life kind of examples and practice. So hopefully that's sort of helpful. I mean, there'll be lots of other stakeholders. I think we'll come on to that in the role play. You can imagine the role of, there'll be other interest groups, other people with a perspective on this Energy Performance Buildings Directive. I'm sure the construction industry will be saying, no, we don't want this legislation. I'm sure doctors or medics and scientific societies might be engaging on this and actually writing in and sort of in favor of this. So we can also think about some of the alliances that you might want to build as a sort of allergy and respiratory advocate. But for now, hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense of what happens with a piece of legislation in the EU system. Unless there's any questions, we can move on. there any questions, anything on the chat? Okay.
No, doesn't look like it. No hands are raised. So I think we can proceed. All right. So what we think is really important is for you to put a lot of this into practice. We don't think there's any better way to learn and understand and digest the information we've provided than to actually act on it and give it a go. We think that's a helpful way for it to stay with you and to resonate past today's session. So what we've got planned in the next couple of slides and for the remaining time today is really to deep dive in this process as if you yourselves were the Commission, the Parliament, EFA representatives, or even healthcare professionals. And where would you come in the legislative process on a particular topic? So the next couple of slides, I will just present to you the way we've set up our activity, our exercise. And if you have any questions, again, just make sure you can either interrupt me or write it up in the chat. So for any of you who might not be familiar, Zoom has done a really good job at replicating a reality. And what they've been able to do is create this feature called breakout groups. So we will virtually split from this main room that we're in. We will take care of doing that. The magic happens on our end. So you will have to do nothing at all but stand in front of your screen. We will split into 2 groups, and we will allow each of you to have a think about what the different institutions and the different actors are thinking, are prioritizing, what their key objectives are when it comes to the legislative process. And the topic that we will be discussing is advancing the European health data space regulation. This we will briefly discuss and introduce to you shortly after this slide. But essentially what we're going to do is split into 2 groups and just have a conversation around what do you deem would be the priorities for the European Commission? What do you think the challenges would be for an EFA representative? Do you think the European Parliament would try to push this forward in its co-legislative process with the Council? Do you think healthcare professionals, like, for example, doctors, have any say in this? What would they think of this initiative, and how would they try to be a part of the process? So this is what we plan to do. We will make sure that there are EFA colleagues with you in the room, and we will also be in the room to guide you and to help you in this reflection process. Any questions so far? Is this clear? Anything that might not be so clear?
So we have to like play the part of one of these 4 organizations.
Yes,
and
that's, yeah.
Okay.
That's exactly it. And again, you'll be supported. We're here to help you and to think this through together, but we'll ask for each of you to pick one of your organizations and think about the process and the priorities.
So we chose the organization we want to be in.
Yeah, we'll let you do that.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? No? Okay, I will hand over to Zoe, who will introduce you to the topic. This is a real life example. The European Health Data Space Regulation is an ongoing regulation currently at EU level. So we'll deep dive briefly now with Zoe before we move on to our breakout groups. Over to you, Zoe.
Yeah, so just going to give you a quick overview of the European Health Data Space Regulation, which is quite a mouthful, but it's very interesting. So, but we're going to shorten it to EHDS for now. So the EHDS is part of the European Health Union, which is a process that was launched by the European Commission on the 11th of November 2020, with the aim to better respond to health crises such as COVID. So it's also part of the greater European Commission's, and by greater I mean just more intersectional strategy on EU digital transition. As a policy initiative, the EHDS aims to provide a common framework across all EU member states in order for them essentially to just share and exchange quality health data, such as electronic health records, patient registries, and all kind of healthcare related data, which would help support healthcare delivery across borders, but then also facilitate health research, policymaking, and legislation. Because as Ginny mentioned at the way beginning of this presentation, obviously healthcare is at an EU member state level. It's one of the competencies of the EU member states. Something like COVID kind of brought that to light in the sense that even though, yes, it is a competency of each individual member state, there is a need for coordination. There is a need for different countries to work together when it comes to health. And this was obviously extremely highlighted by the COVID crisis. So this is why this is also very interesting and very timely. So when it comes to where this regulation is at now in the process, first, there was a combined evaluation roadmap / kind of impact assessment, which we explained before is a kind of quantitative analysis of how a specific legislation would affect various quantifiable indicators like in economics and whatever. And this was conducted and published on the 23rd of December, 2020. And the feedback period ended on the 4th of February, 2021. So now the proposal is in the public consultation stage, which started on the 3rd of May, 2021. So it's all very recent. And this will continue until the 26th of July, 2021. So this consultation aims to gauge essentially what kind of policies would support the implementation of the EHDS in different member states. And the legislative proposal is expected to be adopted in the 4th quarter of 2021. So that's a kind of good background on where it is now, but now we can look at what EFA has, what role EFA has played in this process. And working together, so with the European Academy of Allergy and Clinical Immunology, they played an important role in the process, particularly in the first stage of consultation. And it encouraged the Commission to develop an EU framework of trust and ethical standards around how the data is being collected, shared, used, and processed, because obviously it's all well and nice to want to share data, but we need to also protect patients and protect privacy and confidentiality and make sure that this data is used correctly and in an ethical way. Then also they pushed to lower the technical barriers to data filling, kind of essentially to fill persisting gaps in the individual exercise of health data rights. So that still kind of falls within data like rights and privacy. And then improve patients and citizen access to this data so that it's not just used by governments and companies, but also so that it's accessed by patients and people themselves. And then to boost digital health in Europe, so continue pushing for the digitalization of health and the kind of greater functioning and the overall digital transition that the EU is trying to go through, and to ensure informed, involved, and empowered patients, and make sure that everyone feels included and represented along this entire process. So that was obviously extremely important, and it's something, like I mentioned, that EFA did with another really big stakeholder in this field. So, and I'm sure that EFA will have some more to say about this than I would, but I think that's a good background for us to move towards our exercise. But if there's anything that any EFA members want to add to this or potentially qualify, or please feel free to jump in.
No, not really, Zoe. That was also a very good overview, just to say that we are currently at the second stage of the consultation. We have opened the dialogue, as we do always, with our members at the national level in order to get input from them and feedback. We do that often on all given occasions, because we need national input, we need national experiences, we need national best practices in order that can be uploaded, as we say, at the European Union level. And this is what we do also now in the context of the European Health Data Space Regulation. We do support digital health, this transition towards e-health, but of course, health data are sensitive. We need to be very, very cautious about how they are used, how they are protected, how access is provided to patients, how consent is provided by patients for use of their own health data, and so on. So, yeah.
And maybe just a quick build on that, if I may, Akis. Just my background originally was more in the research, pharmaceutical industry, so very much corporate. But I'll just maybe say one thing to give a bit of a sense of why this matters, because you've got across Europe, 27 health systems with fragmented data historically. So if you're a researcher and you're trying to develop maybe a new drug or a new product, or if you're an academic researcher and you're trying to understand patterns of, I don't know, I guess allergies across different countries, then sharing that data obviously is going to help be more productive in the science that you do. So that's the sort of reasons why it makes sense to have a health data space that doesn't exist at the moment. It's 27 different systems. But on the other hand, as Akis was saying, there's some real questions about ethics and who accesses that information. And they're really important to get right. So there's kind of maybe two sides to that sort of discussion around the health data space, if that's helpful to sort of frame it a little bit.
Very helpful. Thank you, Simon. Any questions before we break out into groups?